Hi besties, welcome to my storytime series. Don't worry, I'm still totally going to do vlogs, but I have so many wild stories and I feel like it's time I share them with you guys. So today we're going to be talking about the most toxic relationship I've ever been in my entire life that I still struggle with. From like so many things have stayed with me from this relationship to this day that affect like my future relationships. Maybe this can be a learning lesson to other people out there. This relationship was very difficult for me to get out of, and when you listen to the story you're going to be like, why did you not just break up with him? But when you're in an abusive relationship, whether it's mental or physical or both, it's a lot harder to leave because your brain literally gets addicted to it. And on top of this, the person that I was dating was mentally ill. They were later diagnosed with delusional disorder or schizophrenia, which also, like, to preface, like, in no means would I ever be making fun of anyone who had any mental illness. There were just like a lot of insane things that led up because he had been undiagnosed for so long. But he also just was not a nice person. I feel sympathy for him that he was struggling with mental illness, but he also was very mean. It was hard for me to leave as well because I wanted to be there for him, but I hope this can be like a learning lesson to some of you out there that, like, no matter how scared you are to leave or how much you feel like you need to be there for someone, it gets to a certain point where you have to put yourself first. And it took me 2 years to get to that point, and I'm still to this day like a little mentally myself messed up from this relationship. I guess we'll just get straight into it. So it was my first real serious relationship in college, I would say. I had like a serious-ish relationship freshman year, but not really. Like, this was sophomore year. I just moved to Boston. And my roommate at the time convinced me to download Tinder. Tinder was like it in 2016, okay? So I downloaded Tinder, and this is the first Tinder date that I went on. This is actually the only Tinder date I've ever been on, but this is so sketchy too. We did not meet in public. I just went to this man's house and we clicked instantly. I remember we just got really drunk together and I slept over and we hooked up, and from that day on we were like inseparable. I think we were like officially dating within a week and a half. And I was so happy. I was like positive I had met my person. We were just so alike and we had so much fun together. And me, him, and Celia, my best friend, would all hang out together, and it never felt like anyone was third wheeling. Like, it was just, we all worked so well together and it was so fun. But about a month into the relationship, I'll never forget, this is the first night where something felt a little bit off, but I didn't really think much of it. Basically, me, Celia, him, and his friend were all drinking at his apartment, and at one point in the night, he had just stormed off and punched a hole in the wall. And I had just come from a very intense party school where people like punched holes in walls, set things on fire, broke furniture, so a hole in the wall wasn't really a red flag to me with drinking involved. I kind of was just like, okay, he got drunk, he punched a hole in the wall. And he was acting kind of weird, but we all were so drunk we just went to bed and I didn't think much of it. And I kind of just moved on. I was like a little weirded out, but I just moved on because, I don't know, I had my love blinders on. I was like, we are literally in love. I am marrying this person. And I was so excited that I thought I had finally found my person. I wouldn't say anything got really bad until this night in November, and this night in November, looking back, I should have broken up with him after this night, but I didn't realize at the time, like, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to regret anything because I learned so much from this relationship, but this was definitely like a moment that I should have really broken up with him. Me, Celia, and him went to a concert in Syracuse, New York. It was, have you been to Syracuse? It's like in the middle of nowhere, and it was in winter. It was very cold outside. And we got to the concert. We'd all been drinking a little bit, and Celia and I were so excited. He was excited too, but it was like all of a sudden a switch had flipped. And he started screaming at me in front of like everyone in the concert around before the concert had started. So it was like very noticeable. He starts to make a scene, and people in front of us and around us start to turn around and look at us. And in response to people like kind of looking at like him, like what's going on, he starts yelling at everyone around us like, okay, like I'm the bad guy, like stare at me all you want, but at least your girlfriend didn't come here to F the person who's performing. And at this point, I was just so confused because everything had been fine a second ago. And now this man was like raging, and I'd never seen him act this way before. He ended up actually getting escorted out by security. I was like so worried about him because I was just like, something's not right. And like, I don't know where he's gonna go. We followed him out because I was just worried. I didn't know what was going on, and I was like panicking. And when we got outside and we saw him like where he had gotten taken out, when he looked behind and saw us, he started sprinting as fast as he could away from us. And we finally found him hiding behind a bush, and like I confronted him and I was like, I just don't know what's going on, like I'm so confused. I thought we were gonna have a good night, like can we all just like, we'll just go back to the hotel and have a good night. And he was refusing and like screaming at us to the point where campus security overheard, and they came over to us and were like, is everything okay? And I was like, honestly, no, like I don't know what's going on. And so campus security just said, I think it's better you all head out and go home. And they got us a taxi and told the taxi driver just drop them off at the hotel they're staying at. So we get into the taxi. Sorry if you can hear Cleo drinking water in the background. She's a thirsty girly. We get into the taxi, and at the first red light that it stops at, he opens the door and just sprints across the highway into the woods. I panicked. I got out of the taxi too because I was like, it was the middle of the winter. It was freezing outside. We were 4 hours from home, and I was so confused. I did not know what was going on. So I ended up calling 911 because I didn't know where he was. Like we could not find him. He just disappeared into the woods. The police came, and they literally thought that I was on something because I was like hyperventilating and panicking so much because I was just so worried. Police were also worried because he just disappeared into the woods, and it was freezing outside, and he did not know where he was going. So there ended up being a search party with police on foot, dogs, they had a helicopter, and there was a search party going on for 3 hours. Eventually they were like, okay, we've used up our resources, like you guys should just go home and hopefully he'll show up. Lo and behold, after we had gotten back to the hotel about an hour later, he did show up. But he wasn't like apologetic, he was just still so angry. So I was relieved to see him, but I was still so confused, like why he was so mad. In the morning, I told him like, look, I don't know what happened last night, but we're breaking up. Keep in mind we had a 4-hour drive home, and about 2 hours into the drive, it was so awkward that I was just honestly like, okay, just for the purposes of the drive, like let's not break up because it's so awkward, and I wanted to work, and I was just hoping this was like a one-time thing. And at this point we were kind of talking, and he was like, that was a one-time thing, like it won't happen again. Also Celia's like in the back seat this whole time, and we kind of make up in the car, and then when we get back to Boston, he like buys me a bouquet of flowers, and he's like, I'm so sorry, like nothing like that will ever happen again, I just drank too much and whatever. I put that kind of like in the back of my brain. I feel a little uneasy, but I'm just like, I'd never seen him act like that before, and I kind of was just like, okay, he says the one-time thing, he was drinking, he was going through something, I don't know. So I just kind of ignored it. Things started to get bad again, and I would say January, about like 3 months after this like first incident, and he started to get very paranoid that I was hooking up with one or both of his roommates. It was specifically, he lived with 2 other guys, and one of them he was really convinced that I was hooking up with or conspiring with against him. He would like slightly accuse me of things, and I would think he was joking. There was no way I would ever be into this roommate that he thought I was hooking up with. Got really, really bad and escalated really bad one night on Valentine's Day. He had booked us a hotel, and we had like a really nice romantic night. I was so happy, and like we went to dinner, we went swimming, and then we went back up to the hotel room and had a drink. And after a few drinks, he started to scream at me and tried to kick me out of the hotel room, saying I was like, just like all these awful names, saying he like knew what I did. I might as well just go back and hang out with his roommate. Like I'm disgusting. It was just like so angry, like out of the blue. It was like, once again, a flip had switched. Like switch had flipped. Switch had flipped. Once again, I didn't know what happened. It was like threatening to kick me out of the hotel room. I ended up going to bed, and in the morning we woke up and he just acted like everything was fine, and I didn't really want to bring the fight up because I was just like, okay, we were drunk, and I just like don't want to bring up his roommate because I don't want to piss him off. And this is where like I started to become very weak in the relationship, because it started to become, I was just like scared of upsetting him. And these outbursts started to become a lot more frequent of him accusing me of things that I didn't do. He would get so sure that I had cheated on him, or like conspired against him, or like talked poorly about him. It started to really affect my mental health, obviously, because he was constantly getting upset with me for things that I just did not do. I'll never forget the first time he blocked my number. Billy and I were visiting my grandpa in California, and I think my boyfriend had anxiety because it was the first time I'd gone on like vacation since we had been dating where I was not around him. We were on FaceTime and he heard Celia laugh in the background. And because she laughed, I guess he thought we were making fun of him. She wasn't even laughing. She was like on her phone scrolling and saw something funny. Anyway, he hung up on me, texted me that like he was just done with me out of the blue, and blocked my number. I was not able to get a hold of him for that whole trip, and I was so devastated. Then on the last day before we were coming back, he unblocked my number, and he didn't apologize. He didn't explain why he blocked my number. He just like talked to me like normal. He was like, hey, I miss you, how are you, love you. I was just so relieved that he had unblocked my number. I like didn't get mad. I was just so happy that I was talking to him again that I like just didn't even want to bring up that past week. The blocking became more and more frequent. I would say one thing wrong, or he would just sometimes like, he would be thinking too much and he would block my number. I remember one time my friend Alex was sleeping over. In the middle of the night, he called me and he was like, you're disgusting. And just, he was like, I'm so done with you. And he blocked my number. And I think that time he had blocked my number for like 2 weeks, to a point where I was so scared to say anything because I could literally say hi wrong and he would block my number. And it started to get, I wouldn't say necessarily physically violent because he never hit me, but he would do things to intimidate me. I remember one time like I was at his house like begging him like, please just believe me, like I'm not cheating on you, I would never cheat on you. He was like screaming at me to get out. When I like didn't leave immediately, he punched a hole in the wall like right next to my face, which is definitely an intimidation tactic. Like he didn't touch me, but it was like, and threw a chair at me. And that's when I was like, okay, this is actually scary, and I left. But of course we made up, and I was once again just so relieved we made up. I started to put my life not in danger, that sounds so dramatic, but he started to do things that were more physical, but it was confusing because it was never directly on me. I parked my car at his house because he had a free parking space. He in turn like said like I wasn't allowed to drive my car. I don't know where that rule came from, but he would make these rules and I wouldn't question them because I didn't want to upset him, which is crazy. But the whole relationship basically became me making sure I didn't upset him. I needed my car one day, but he had to go to class, so he told me the only way I could have my car is if I dropped him off at class, but he didn't let me drive my car. So we're driving, it's early in the morning, and there's a lot of one-way streets in Boston, and there was a UPS truck that was unloading packages that was blocking the street. Instead of waiting for the truck to pass, and I think I made a joke like, oh, of course, like there's a UPS truck like in the middle of the road and we're like rushing. He got pissed, rammed my car into the UPS truck. The whole passenger door was like so caved in, you couldn't open the door, and so of course I started crying. He started to mock me as I was crying. When he was mocking me, I was like, you need to get out of my car. Like, I don't feel safe in the car with you. He got out. He blocked my number again for a week after that. He Venmoed me $1,000 for the damage, which it was way more than $1,000. And he blocked my number. If I ever got upset with something he did, like if I had just let that roll off and like didn't say anything, he probably wouldn't have blocked my number. But if I ever got upset with him, that would guarantee a block from him. And then after he blocked my number, I'm like sitting in my room, like devastated, sobbing, just wishing I didn't get upset with him, which is so crazy because of course I should get upset with someone for ramming my car into a UPS truck. There were a lot of car related incidents. There was another time that we were driving back to my parents' house to go pet sit. I was actually allowed to drive this one time. Once again, there was a random outburst. He started like calling me all these names, telling me how disgusting and like what a terrible person I was. Told me to like pull over and drop him off on the side of the highway. And I was like, I'm not going to drop you off on the highway. That's very unsafe. And like, where will you go? Because I didn't listen to him to drop him off on the highway, he started to try to grab the steering wheel and crash my car. And he ended up putting my car in neutral on the highway, like trying to stop my car in the middle of the highway, which really could have gotten us in a serious accident. Also trying to punch the windows out of my car as I was driving. I had to pull over and let him out. He ended up running out of my car. Came back like 20 minutes later because he had nowhere to go. The first time we broke up was on my birthday, of course. I went to his house and he had bought me earrings that when he gave them to me, he told me that he doesn't think I deserve the earrings, but he decided to get them for me anyway. And I was like, okay. I remember I had like looked at my phone. About 5 minutes later, one of his roommates had arrived to his apartment because they were moving out, and I was helping him, not his roommate, I was helping my boyfriend move out. As I looked at my phone and his roommate had arrived within like a window of me glancing at my phone, he started to scream at both of us, saying he knew we were conspiring against him. He kicked me out and sent me home. I was devastated because I did nothing wrong. I got a therapist and I was like, I'm just gonna move on. Then he ended up moving into an apartment that was like a block away from me, and he had planned this before we broke up, like we were gonna live closer together, like closer in the same neighborhood. Because now he was living in this apartment closer to me, he would start to stalk me, and that's when it got really kind of scary. He would ring my doorbell and then he would drop things off on the doorstep, whether it was like something I had given him that he was giving back, or sometimes there would be notes that he would drop on my doorstep saying like he knows I'm this disgusting person, but he still loves me even though I'm so disgusting. And he would ring the doorbell and then run across the street and hide behind the bushes and watch me grab the things from my doorstep. I told the therapist about like everything we had been through. She had told me like as a mandated reporter, if I ever hung out with him again and told her, she would have to call the police. Like it would be her obligation, because she was like, with everything I had told her, she was like, your life is seriously at risk hanging out with him. That really freaked me out because I knew it was bad, but I never knew it was that bad. Then one night I got drunk and I knew he was close by, and I called him and I went over to his house. And I remember feeling so scared. It hit me at one point. I was like, oh my God, like I should not be here. I had like the scariest, I've never felt so scared in my gut before. But I was too scared to leave because I was like, I like don't want to raise any alarms on his end. So I ended up sleeping over and being so scared because I just like didn't want to upset him. The next day he ended up leaving and going home to get professional help, and he took a leave from school. He got diagnosed, and then once he was on medication, I decided to give a try with him again. And I know that's crazy after everything we'd been through, but I did love him so much and I wanted to be there for him, and that was the hard part, especially after I knew he was struggling with like a mental health thing. I just wanted to be there for him. So we got back together. I was hoping it would be better. It just never was. Like he was just still so mean. I would say some of the paranoia went away, but he was just so mean. When he got to my apartment, if we didn't hook up immediately, like literally we couldn't even say a word. If we didn't like hook up the first thing, he would accuse me of cheating on him and be like, why don't you want to hook up with me? So it would be like the second he got there, we always had to hook up, and it was like just a lot. It got to a point after trying it again and he was medicated, realizing he was just actually a mean person as well. He like tore my confidence down completely and would always call me disgusting and stupid. And like I got to a point one day, like about like 4 months into dating him again after we had broken up, where I was like, okay, I just need to end things. This is never going to work. I was scared to break up with him while he was visiting me in Boston, because then he'd have a 4-hour drive back, and I didn't want him to like do something to himself on the drive home. I called Celia and was like, I need you to come to New York with me this weekend and like help me do this breakup, because I like can't do it alone. I was scared to break up with him for many reasons. I didn't want him to do something to himself, do something to me. So we're all driving to New York, and no one was allowed to like talk on the drive. He was like he was so mean, and he hated me. Like he literally hated me, and he hated Celia. And I remember at one point in the drive, I was like, oh, like it's just to make sure, like it's okay that Celia's coming, right? And he was like, I didn't ask them. And Celia was like, you didn't ask them? Like I feel so awkward. And then he turns around to Celia and goes, can you shut the F up? Like screaming at her. At this point, we're all just silent in the car, like so uncomfortable. We get to New York, and it's so hard for me to break up with him because he's like being nice again at this point, and like he invited a friend over and we're all drinking downstairs. I remember going to the bathroom and like being like, universe, like please give me a sign to break up with him, because like I just can't do it. I need to get out of the relationship, but I cannot do it. The second I came back out, I swear to God, he started to like just say all these like gross things about me and like how he wanted me to like hook up with him. And I was like, can we not do this? We're like around a bunch of other people, and he was just being like really gross and vulgar. And then he said, okay, fine, well, if you don't want to hook up with me, Celia, will you? And he asked my best friend to hook up with him. And so then I broke up with him. Celia and I literally, we got the next train home, and unfortunately he ended up living in the same neighborhood as me and Celia that next year. He would definitely still have like stalkerish tendencies. He switched gyms to go to my gym, and he would sit on the gym equipment and just stare at me. And I remember like I'd be like walking on the treadmill, and he'd walk up to me and like tap me on the shoulder and flip me off. But one night I did get really, really drunk. This is the last time I ever saw him, and I'll never forget it. I got really drunk, and I went to his apartment and I hooked up with him. Like I was like blackout drunk. In the morning, I woke up and like I didn't know where I was. And the first thing I heard was someone saying, do you regret this yet? And I was like, oh my God, I need to get out of here. And I felt like unsafe, and I left, and that was the last time I ever saw him, aside from him watching me from afar in the gym. So desperate to help him, but you have to put yourself first. I got to a point where like I didn't want to tell my friends about like our fights, or my family about our fights, because I wanted everyone to like him. And when you get to that point where you're like protecting the other person, you feel like you can't freely talk about them, that's when you know it's bad. You have to put yourself first. At the end of the day, like you can be there for someone to an extent, but you can't lose yourself in trying to be there for someone.